Okay.
Hello, I'm Tara Ruckman.
And I'm Stephanie Howe, and we are Control the Chaos EDU. Are you burnout? Are you feeling frustrated or overwhelmed?
Or maybe it's the opposite, and you're a go-getter and want to level up. Then it's time to dive in with real talk and solution-focused conversations.
Hello, and welcome to today's Control the Chaos conversation. We're going to be talking about the learning pit, and we're going to go back 9 years to my first year of teaching, where I did not understand the learning pit, and the pit scared me. So when I was working with students, I had students that had different disabilities, and when they didn't know how to solve something when it came to fractions or long division was the worst. When they didn't know those different skills, the pit really did scare me. I wanted them to continuously be successful. And so what I would do is I would spoon feed my kids, and I would give them maybe sometimes overly scaffold the learning, or sometimes even kind of provide the answer for them. And I was, again, doing a lot of the work. And so when I started to learn about this learning pit, I think it was like my 3rd year of teaching. So those poor kids, the first 2 years, didn't go through the pit. I just kind of dragged them through. I realized that I wasn't encouraging or having them go through like a growth mindset. They weren't promoting that independent learning because we were doing it either together or I was modeling a lot. They also didn't have resilience, or sometimes I was not providing the best differentiation either. Like I was just like, oh, they won't get this, so I'm just going to provide all of these different scaffolds and different things like that to help them overcome this learning pit, and then they never would go through it. And so I was doing my students a disservice because they weren't going through that learning pit, because there are skills that we learn when we go through that pit, right? And so as I was kind of doing the work for my students or modeling it for them or spoon feeding it to them, I slowly realized that they needed to go through that pit, even though it might be scary or it might be hard for them to overcome. But some of the skills that they did gain allowed them to not just have that surface level knowledge, and they started to work on some of those executive functioning skills as well.
I love that story. I have not heard that story before.
It was bad. Melissa Turner will even say, like, we're spoon feeding our kids. And I was like, no, we're not. Denial. But she was kind of the one that helped me realize my issues.
At least you realized your issues. At least you did.
Yeah,
So this episode, I'm going to be really honest. We talked about this episode several weeks in advance. So I'm going to go ahead and apologize to my listeners, our listeners, for all the likes and the ums that I'm about to say, because I just hopped on the notes really quickly and we're flying by the seat of our pants. We were supposed to record a different episode this morning and I wasn't ready for this one. Steph's like, let's record the learning pit. So that's the real us. So if I say like or I didn't really think about this yet this morning. So let's get into stage 1. Stage 1 is that learning challenge. So basically, this is our student, our learner is presented with this problem, issue, concept, that they have kind of the basic idea, understanding. They're really at the surface level. They don't have any of that conceptual understanding yet of what the topic is. So maybe you take just a real simple piece of it, right? Like addition. I could look at addition on a math sheet, right? And I know that 3 plus 2 equals 5, but I'm just adding those numbers together. But conceptually, if I have a set of blocks and I have 3 blocks and I say, now show me 3 plus 2, like they know that addition means to add something to it. So maybe you could look on a piece of paper and you have that like surface learning, but when you actually break it down, are they going to know what the vocabulary means? Do they know that add means I need to take something and add it to it? Or do they know what subtraction means? If I have this group, I have to take it away, or they kind of just like the numbers walking through the problems, just understanding that. So that conceptual understanding is we're looking at mastery of that in that first within the learning pit. So that first one is that basic level, surface level of understanding is step 1 for the concepts. They do not have that conceptual level yet.
And I think too, as a teacher, it's great to kind of look over that learning of what you're about to teach and what misconceptions are your students going to have. And again, as a first year teacher, that was really hard because I've never taught that standard or that concept to actual humans, right? Like I taught it to maybe myself or thought like, this is how this lesson's going to go. But I didn't realize which areas they were going to start to have misconceptions. And so then I started to realize that maybe year 2 or 3, okay, kids really struggle with changing the denominator when it comes to fractions. And so knowing that also kind of allowed me to go, okay, it's okay that they're going to struggle here and we're going to get through it. And these are maybe some strategies that I can use. So stage number 2 is that conflict. This is the stage where children have to kind of show that deep thinking that leads to maybe even deeper understanding. And I think a lot of times, sometimes when we do spoon feed, we just keep it at that surface level. But when we do enter that conflict, we go deeper in our understanding of whatever we are learning. And so then we start to go right into this pit, and it really helps, and you can use prior knowledge. So again, when we're looking at long division, students have to know how to add, subtract, multiply, divide. They have to know those skills in order to do long division because it's kind of multi-step. And so knowing that, we have to take that knowledge and kind of remind students, well, you already know how to do this part of this equation, and just kind of keep them understanding and challenging them to think deeper when they're looking at these new concepts.
Yeah, and I think this is the challenge is when the learners get into that pit, right? Um, that's where they kind of, I don't know, whether they jump, they leap, they fall, whatever it is, they're presented with this challenge, and this is where most of them show that deeper level thinking, or we want to lead them to that deeper level of thinking. So whether we are the challenge maybe was okay, we're learning long division, but now we have to apply it to that real life situation or to the word problems, and then we get into that conflict of, do they have that prior knowledge, or that like what I was talking about with the adding? So do they have the concept of like when we add something that we're taking and we're adding, it's not just a plus sign that we're doing, but we're looking at that conceptual piece because we need to know what that add, subtract, multiply is in order to get to that long division. So you have the basic idea is that surface level, that's where you are at stage 1, and then you present that learning challenge that you have to maybe apply it to a real life situation or a word problem. And then that conflict is where you're really like falling in pits, and establishing that cognitive conflict in the minds of kiddos. And then we get into stage 3. So this is the construct stage. of the learning pit. So this is where we want to start to see kids make those connections and have different viewpoints, cause and effect, that deeper level options, considering options, clarity, and some degree of like the light bulb. That's like the image that I think of when I get to construct. It's like that light bulb goes off and they make that connection. Like how many things can you call it? The light bulb, the aha moments that we have where we make that connection between what we already know, what we kind of know, and that deeper level thinking. So some of those things might look like them asking good questions, and they continue to keep trying and review their mistakes and breaking down the problem. I think those are really important pieces to start making those connections, right? At first, we failed, and now we need to fail forward. We need to look at why we failed at long division or that challenge. Or maybe it is a word problem and we attempted to do the word problem. It was the challenge. We had the prior knowledge, but we still did not complete the problem correctly. So maybe now what we need to do is we need to review our mistakes. We need to break down the problem and highlight the key words in the word problem. So that way we start to make some of those connections and get into that construct stage. So there's lots of strategies that you could do to get a student to that construct stage, and maybe those different levels of questions, right? So the DOK levels of questions that we could look at to kind of help students get to that construct stage. We start at a lower level question, and then we add the generative questions, and then we continue to increase what those questions are until we start making those light bulb and aha moments for our students to connect to different viewpoints and degree of revelation.
Yeah, and I did a session this past week at a conference, and I actually invited my friend Clay to join me, and he works at Google. And what was kind of interesting is he was sharing like some of the strategies that I was kind of sharing with him. He's like, we do that at Google. Like, and I was like, oh, like this is good stuff then. And so one of the things that they do is in school, you can do an error analysis where students look over the mistakes that they make, and then they make corrections on how they're going to fix that mistake or where they see those different areas. And they actually do something like that at Google where they actually review what they did and then they analyze and make it better with their coding or with different products that they're creating. And so I thought that was kind of really cool how he was describing some of this learning pit as well when he was developing that. And so then the final stage is stage 4, where it's consider. And this is kind of where you're reflecting on the learning and you're taking this into that deep learning stage. You're going up that mountain. You're about to the top to see that wonderful view. And this is where the learner maybe connects all of those different concepts and answers, and they start to see it work and they're able to apply their knowledge. So this is where that reflection takes place. The celebration can take place as well. And I think it just can be a great way for students to reflect, but sometimes we leave this stage out and we can't do that, right? We've got to reflect on their learning. We have to celebrate what they do. I recently bought a bubble gun and it's so much fun. I feel like you could just use that to just celebrate your students once they get out of that learning pit.
That's fun.
Yeah.
When are you using that? Have you used it yet?
Yeah, I used it at the Innovation Conference.
Okay.
Anytime somebody
That's
won
fun.
the Smackdown, they got bubbles blown at them. I think I paid like $40 on Amazon, but it has been totally, totally worth it. And then I did a session at OETC, and it was interesting. My session was at 2:15, which is a hard time because your brain is fried. Usually it's day 2 of the conference. It's the end of the day. and people came in and they looked exhausted. But then we started blasting bubbles at them, and their whole mood changed just by blowing bubbles in their faces.
Yeah.
um,
Everybody needs a little bit of elementary in their life.
yeah, and so then today I'm actually going into a classroom to celebrate some of them that turn in all their work for the week, and I'm going to blast them with bubbles.
That sounds
Also
so
works.
much fun.
It works for potty training as well. AJ loves the bubble machine. So that's like one of his like potty rewards. And then we like chase each other around the house with this blowing bubbles at each other. It's really fun. Best buy I've ever bought. I was like, I think I saw it on Twitter. Someone was welcoming students into their school. And I was like, that is a great idea. It just changes people's moods, right? Like when they see these
Yeah,
bubbles.
they're so much fun.
Yeah.
I mean, really, and if you go back to our February episode about 5 languages of appreciation, we could add bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
could share our appreciation through bubbles.
Yeah.
But I think I heard once, and I can't remember who said it, is that like all middle schoolers and junior high kids need a little bit of elementary still in their life. Do you
Yeah.
remember that? Where were we?
It's,
We were at a conference.
Illinois with Berkemeyer.
Yeah, so great. But that like brings me back to that our kids need a little bit of elementary. So that's in stage 4. We definitely have to celebrate. So how you celebrate is up to you. But I love the bubble route. Now, I don't know if I'd buy a $40 bubble gun if I would use it that much, but
Oh,
I could buy the 99 cents blow your own bubbles. Like the Easter Bunny used to bring my kids in their Easter baskets. I'm not as fancy as you, but so yeah, that's celebrate. We can making sure that we celebrate our kids, or the the fact that we have applied this new understanding to our context. We've faced our learning challenges, right? We got past that long division challenge of applying it to real life or completing the problem in a word problem, not just that surface learning of long division. So we've gone through all of these stages, and then we want to make sure that we celebrate and reflect.
yeah. And one thing I want to bring up real quick is to emotions. Emotions play a role in this learning pit, right? Like when you start not knowing something, you feel frustrated, you feel overwhelmed, you feel there's so many different emotions. And I think that's important to remember as a teacher. And we have to create these environments in our classroom where kids feel safe to fail. And a lot of times I'll walk in and you don't sometimes see that in classrooms. Kids are scared to fail. They're scared to make mistakes. And so I think it's important to kind of think about how do I create these environments where when students are getting to stage 2, where they are experiencing that, conflict area and those emotions of overwhelm and just frustration start to appear, how are you supporting their emotional control and how are they going to respond? And are you creating an environment where it is safe to fail? And are you kind of cheering them on and being their biggest fan during that stage?
Yeah, and it's a great way to tie in the social emotional learning standards. When we look at self-awareness and self-management and how you're able to identify your personal emotions and be able to manage your own behaviors within different situations, whether it's happy, sad, frustrated, um, all of those things. So you brought up a great point, and this is one way that we can kind of teach those standards instead of teaching them in isolation, but also model, making sure that we're modeling that. And one of the things I like to do when I model some of those things is making sure that I use my own dialogue to self-talk, but to talk out loud and say to kids, I've got a problem and I'm really frustrated right now with this problem. And and share your thoughts with your students when you have those problems, so that they see that what you do when you're frustrated. So if they do get in that learning pit and they've been faced with this challenge, you have been modeling for them what that looks like when you're faced with a challenge with some of your emotions, and what you do to problem solve it. That you, I mean, maybe help is one of the ways that you do reach out, seek help in appropriate ways. But how do I seek help? Is it that I'm asking somebody to do it for me, or do I seek help in how to problem solve it? And then I start to learn ways of problem solving versus somebody actually just completing the challenge for me. So that it's when you get into this learning pit, like you said, it's a great way to look at what your emotion regulation is, and kind of go through the stages where you struggle, you're frustrated, you keep control of those emotions when you are in the learning pits, and you implement strategies to control those emotions and also be able to stay focused on problem solving to get out of the pit. And then you get back up to the top and you celebrate those with those happy emotions. So you kind of go through a gamut of emotions throughout the process, right? You start off, you're pretty calm and cool. You're presented with a challenge. You get a little frustrated, or maybe you don't. But you kind of take those emotions with you up and down in the learning pit. So that's a super great way to interweave those social emotional learning standards within the pit. All right. So your challenge, your call to action is thinking about teaching a concept. How can you use this model to create a growth mindset in your classroom? How can you use the learning pit to say, I'm going to address those social emotional standards. I'm going to walk kids through problem solving and have that deep learning stage, get to that stage 4 where we get to reflect and celebrate. How do we walk through and dive in the pit and climb our way out of it? So think about how you can use this teaching concept within your classroom. Share with us. As always, like, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. That would be very motivating to us, some positive reinforcement and celebration for us. And until next time, control the chaos.
Thanks for listening to Control the Chaos EDU. Check out the description for show notes.
We look forward to connecting with you on social media. Subscribe to the weekly podcast so you never miss an episode. Control the chaos. Until next time.